Right, so Alex, you come here today. We're doing some bits and pieces of filming, and we thought what we'd do, rather than basically going out stalking, is we'd have a look at an actual broken down carcass, a sort of a half broken down carcass, if we like, and look at all the bits that come off a deer carcass and all how we cook them. This is a small fallow that I shot last weekend, and we've got every part right basically on here on this table that we can look at and how it's cooked and how we joined it up and everything. So if we start from the top, if we come this way, Alex, we've got this piece here, which is the neck. So some people call this the scrag. Now off this side, I've taken the actual meat off of this side of it. You can see that's the top there, that's the other side of it. This is quite a small fallow, and obviously that would fit onto there. Yeah, and this is quite a small fallow. But what we get out of these are these little dobes. We call them little dobes. This is quite a flat one. If you've got a larger fallow, especially during the rut, the necks are really, really big, and you get some lovely ones of these, you know, around about sort of like 200 grams, like 180 grams, something like that. This is a really tough piece of meat. This is part of the neck. So basically what it does is it means that the neck muscles of the animal lift its head up and down, up and down. So it's a piece of meat that's working a lot. Now, when we talk about meat, we divide meat into two things: first class cuts and second class cuts. And then they're divided into first class cooking methods and second class cooking methods. What does that mean? Well, anything that is a first class cut is anything that is pan fried, roasted, grilled, barbecued. Anything that's a second class cut is anything that is braised, stewed, minced, if you like. You have to break up the fibres. So it's all tough things. So this bit here is a very tough piece of meat. And this will actually need very slow, long cooking methods. So moving on from the neck, or the scrag as we called it, we then get either side of the carcass, we get the shoulders. And this is one of the shoulders on here. And when I've taken this shoulder off, I've taken it going all the way up and round the scapula, which is basically here, the shoulder blade. Now you can see obviously this contains lots of meat, and if we look at it, you can see all the white muscle groups underneath the meat, underneath this skin here. Those white muscle groups, all that white stuff that's in there is all collagen and sinew, and that's tough. Yeah, again, this is a part of the animal that does a lot of work, so therefore it's a very tough. We can always roast a shoulder of lamb or a shoulder of pork, but that's because they're very, very young animals. Lamb is basically under a year old, and most pork's under a year old as well. This animal will probably be a lot older, and it's also running around a lot, so therefore it's again tough meat. So this sort of stuff, what can we use this for? Well, we've got here mint, and we've got here dice. I like dice from the shoulder, and the dice from the shoulder will basically have a little bit of sinew in it, and that sinew, as we cook it down for a stew, will mean that the stew will basically have lots of gelatin in it, yeah, and that means lots of flavour, retaining the moisture within the actual meat for long, slow cooking methods. So that's what the shoulder is good for. It's great for that sort of thing, for those slow cooking methods. And this is the long saddle. Now it's called the long saddle because it actually contains three joints on it. One part here at the top, which is known as the scrag. Then you've got this middle bit here, where you've got all these arched bones, which is called the middle neck. And then you've got these, let's just take this off so you can see it. You've got these short bones here, short flat bones. This is the true saddle. So this here is the loin. And you can see how the loin sits on there. There's the loin there on the other side, which we haven't taken off. You can see where the shoulders come off here. Yeah, the shoulders basically uncovered all of that. In actual fact, this bit here, where this shoulder has come off, and that would have been this shoulder here that would have come off of there. It's because it's uncovered the meat, you can get some cutlets out of this, and normally they're known as uncovered cutlets because you've uncovered it by taking the shoulder off. And in your lamb, that would be what you would use for your Irish stew. The actual eye of the meat would be broken up into lots of little muscles, and that's because you've got lots of little individual muscles as you go up the neck. Here on the best end, this is where you get your racks, yeah, and your cutlets. And then here, down here on the true saddle, is where you'd get your chops. Or, if you look at it this way, if we just take that right up to the end there, you can see if you cut across, and if we had all of the sinew on the outside, you'd get your wing chops or Barnsley chops as they come off of there if you cut them straight across. A single chop would be through the middle, and then you've got one piece from one side, one piece from the other, and right across there you've got a double chop or a Barnsley chop or a wing chop as they call it as well. This here is one of the most tenderest pieces out of the whole animal. There's only one piece that's more tender than this. And this is known as the loin eye. Yeah, down here, once we've cleaned it up, once we've taken all the sinews off the outside, the loin eye on there. And we can basically, it's one of the most expensive parts of the whole animal as well. You can see that it tapers off as we get to the top here. And you've got like a thin bit that goes up to the top there, and you've got a thicker bit as it goes down here to the rump. This can be pan fried, it can be roasted, you can sous vide it, you can cook it on barbecues, you can even basically open it out, scallop it, and have it in a sandwich. It's absolutely delicious. It's one of the most expensive parts of the actual animal. Now, if we turn this upside down and have a look underneath, we've got in here, yeah, these that would come off of there. They come off this side in here, like that. And these are the fillets. Okay, this is a fillet, but basically containing everything on it. And then when we take it apart, we end up with this, which is the two little bits of the fillet. So this is the fillet, and this little bit here is called the chain. This little bit there. Very, very tender piece of meat. If we were to take a little piece of meat off of the fillet and just hold it into our fingers and basically mash it up, you'd soon see that it basically will break down into like a mush very, very quickly. That's because this is the most tenderest part of the whole animal. Fillet steak is the tenderest steak out of the whole of a carcass of beef. This is the most tenderest part out of the whole carcass of venison. Doesn't have a lot of flavour, and if you actually look at it, you can see that we can pull it apart quite easily with our fingers, yeah, because of the way the fibres are, they're very long. This does not really do a lot of work. It allows an animal to swivel its hips. And how many times do you see a deer swiveling its hips? Not a lot. So therefore, it's a very, very tender piece of meat. What can we use it for? Well, that piece of meat is tended to be used for things like carpaccios, for things like tartar, all stuff like that, because it's such a tender piece of meat. And what you will see is basically on larger animals, you get a really nice round loin, yeah, a round fillet, and that round fillet will give you some lovely carpaccio, slices of carpaccio that you can get. Whereas on these ones, because they're so small, this is what we call a pencil fillet, because it's a very small fallow. We tend to basically use this more for things like tartars. You can also cut it into stir fry. It makes great stir fry for things like a stroganoff or anything like that. It's great, really tender, lovely piece of meat. Now, as we go on the edge, on this bit here, you can see where it's been cut off here. We've got the breast, and that's the breast that would have come off of there. Yeah, this is the breast here. Now, the breast is basically layers of meat. You can see a layer upon another layer of meat. They're all layered on top of each other. If we go to this side here, you can see how they're layered on top of each other. If we turn it over, you can see that the bones, all the rib bones coming up the inside of the breast. Now those rib bones can be removed by basically running a knife down them and pulling those out. So you end up with like a flat piece of venison, or a flat piece of basically the breast. And it is a fantastic piece of meat, because this piece of meat, again, does a lot of work. It's a piece of meat because it's layered with sinew. If you cook it slowly, the gelatin of the sinew melts into the actual meat itself, and it gives you a phenomenal piece of lovely tender piece. I love making things like epigrams out of this. Epigrams is where we take this piece of meat, take all the bones out, we cook it very slowly in a stock, or sous vide it very, very slowly. And then once it's nice and tender, we then press it like a pork belly. So by pressing it, you're compounding all of the actual pieces of meat in there. Sometimes I'll fold them over and press them. And there's a natural gelatin in the meat that makes it stick together. And then once it's gone cold, I'll cut it into pieces, flour, egg and breadcrumb it, and deep fry it, and might serve it with like something like a truffle mayonnaise or a Dijon mayonnaise or stuff like that. So really, really nice piece of meat. Other than that, a lot of this gets basically turned into mince. Yeah, so we've got that into mince as well, because again, it's a tough piece of meat. It needs a lot of cooking. As we go further down through the animal, we've got now into the haunches. So the haunch of venison. This is a classic haunch roast. Yeah, and with a haunch, the name of it, it's the only part of the animal that has its own name. So the haunch, anything that comes, a back leg that comes off a wild animal is known as a haunch. So you've got a haunch of venison, you get a haunch of wild boar. You get a leg of lamb, you get a leg of pork. Yeah, so they're not called haunches, but anything that comes from a wild animal is a haunch. And this is the haunch. And the haunch contains part of the rump muscle here and the whole of the leg, including the shank. Now this one here, when I cut it, the actual bone splintered on the end of the bone. Normally there's a lovely clean bone, and I would normally take that marrow bone out from the middle of that bone there. And the reason I take the marrow bone out is because once it's cooked, this piece of meat, you can actually, the actual meat will recede down and give you a lovely white bone. Now you can hold on to that bone as you're carving it. Or in the olden days, what they would have had is they would have had like a little clip that goes on there with a stag's head, and the stag's head will be able, in the old houses, so they could carve that at the table. But it's a lovely piece of meat. Sometimes a little bit of a difficult piece of meat to cook because there's lots of different muscles inside it. And because there's lots of different muscles, it can be a little bit difficult to get right. You know, some of the muscles can be lovely and pink, and some of the muscles can get a little bit overcooked. I try not to overcook this. I try to basically cook it, get a nice colour on it first in the oven, and then once I've got that nice cover it, give it sort of like, depending on basically the size of the haunch, give it enough time to maintain it lovely and pink. And I'd rather let it rest for quite a long time, right? So that it maintains that sort of medium rare in the middle run all the way through the actual piece of meat. But it's a lovely, lovely piece of meat. That lovely to marinate with rosemary and garlic and olive oil and stuff like that in there. Now out of that, what we can do is we can break it down. And we can break it down into its component parts. And this is what most chefs do. These are the component parts that come out of one actual shoulder. One leg. So we've got the shank. This is not a very good shank because, again, the bone split when we were cutting it. It's a very young animal. But the shank contains basically all of the meat, yeah, from the joint. So from here up, yeah, towards the bottom of the foot. You've got the bone on there. Normally take the marrow bone out of it as well. We can also cut this into little pieces, and we can get things like ossobucos out of them with the marrow in the middle, which are delicious. Again, a slow cooking cut. All of these are fast cooking cuts, yeah, so first class cuts and first class pieces of meat. Here we've got all of the component muscle groups, yeah, from the haunch, and what these are all seam boned into their individual component parts with no sinew. So you've got here the top side, you've got here the thick flank, the salmon cut, the silver side, the bullet, and the thin flank, yeah, on the underside. So all of these are basically individual pieces, yeah, and obviously here, sorry, the rump, the D-shaped rump at the end. So starting from here, this bit here, this is this bit here, and this is the D-shaped rump, and it's shaped like the letter D. Yeah, you can see that how it's shaped like a letter D. Now underneath it, if we take this top layer off of here, we get the rump heart, which is this piece underneath here. Yeah, now these can all be basically pan fried, segregated with quite a few different muscles. Yeah, so some chefs don't like it. If you've got a large one, you can pan fry these with a little bit of fat. They've got fat on the outside of them, and you can roast them in the oven, then slice them like that across the top of them. You can take this top layer off and just have the heart of the rump, and then pan fry that as well. It's absolutely delicious. Lovely piece of meat. It's not as tender as the loin. No way is it as tender as the loin, but it has a lot more flavour than the loin. A lot more flavour than the loin. These individual pieces here can all be cut into steaks. All the steaks on a deer come from the haunch. We don't tend to get steaks from the loin. So with these, we'd cut them into pieces about sort of like that, which will give you like a lump of meat, yeah, that's basically just squared, also known as a pave. And those are very, very tender. So out of these, so these 4 pieces that we have here would be where we'd cut our paves from those 4 pieces there. The other 2 pieces that we've got, which is the salmon cut and the bullet, this is called the bullet because it's shaped like a bullet. These 2 are slightly different. The salmon cut looks like a fillet, yeah, and sometimes basically it has been sold as a fillet from less reputable butchers. But this, although it's very tender, if you cook it whole, it tends to curl up because of the way the structure of the meat is. So what we tend to do with this is we cut it for stir fry, or we cut it into chunks basically for things like kebabs. And the same happens with the bullet. The bullet basically can be cut the same way. The only problem with the bullet is just there, and just here there's an artery that runs through, and you have to scoop that artery out, take it out because it's a bit sinewy, yeah, and then you can cut this up into basically dice. Obviously with larger deer this is going to be much, much bigger. And again, we tend to use that for stir fry and for things like kebabs, so those 2 will better stay together. With these other bits that we've got here, individual pave from there, this one here, which basically is the piece that sits underneath that bit there, yeah, the thick flank. There is a piece of sinew that runs through the middle of it. Now on a larger deer, you can take that piece of sinew out and you can divide it into 2. On a small deer like this, all we do is trim the ends off here, and we tend to use it as a piece. There's a very, very small piece of sinew in there. It's not too much to worry about. Again, I can use it like that. If I don't want to, I can put it with the others and basically use it for stir fry. The top side that we've got here, The top side we square off and we cut into individual little parves, yeah, which you can pan fry. And again, you can take all of these and you can roast them. You don't have to cook them as pan fried. You can have them roasted as well. Another important thing to talk about, the bones. All of the bones on the deer are fantastic for stock. If you're going to make a jus, if you're going to make flavoured sauces to basically work with your venison, this is what you want to do. If you haven't got these bones to be able to make stock, to make your sauces, don't use beef stock. Beef stock is overpowering for venison. Use chicken stock and then reinforce it with any of the trimmings that you've got from your deer, your venison, by frying them off and put them into the stock to reinforce the flavour and beef up the flavour into basically sort of like a venison-y flavour, yeah. But a chicken stock is sort of like a sort of neutral flavour to be able to then basically reinforce with all the trimmings of it. Now, obviously, with the mince and with the dice basically for all the stews and long cooking, and with the mince, what we've done with the mince is we've taken all of the trim that we've ended up with from the venison and we've minced it up. By mincing it up, we've broken up the fibres in the venison, and that means that we've made it a lot more tender. That can be used for things like sausages, burgers, make a meatloaf out of it. There's lots of things that we can do with that mince. Bologneses, lasagnas, and those sorts of things are fantastically healthy because obviously venison contains very, very little fat. We're just going to be careful how we cook it, yeah? And remember that when you're doing something like a lasagna or a bolognese or anything like that, yeah, especially with a bolognese is a meat sauce, not a sauce with meat in it, yeah? It's a meat sauce, which then can be used obviously with pasta. But all of this just goes to show what you can get out of a deer and how many portions we can break it down with. If you want to go into whole lumps, you do that. If you want to go into individual pieces, you do that. Here, remember, with the middle part of the deer, this is the fillet. What's underneath? The thing that's on top is the loin. I see so many chefs call this the fillet of venison, and it's not a fillet of venison. I also see chefs cut across this and take out a piece which they pan fry, and they call it a sirloin of venison. There is no such thing as a sirloin of venison. There is only one sirloin, and the sirloin's on a piece of beef. And the only reason it's on a piece of beef is because it got knighted. And that's why we call it a sirloin. You get a loin of lamb, loin of pork, loin of venison. You do not get a sirloin of any of them. It's only on a piece of beef. Actual fact, I can't remember whether it was Henry VIII or Charles I that did it, but one of them loved that piece of meat so much that he had it brought forward and he knighted it. So that's why we call it a sirloin of beef. So we don't get sirloins from that. Loin, fillet on the inside. So you've seen the breakdown of the whole deer and what we can use everything for. If you want to know recipes for this, right, obviously my book, Venison the Game Larder, basically has a lot of these recipes in it. It's also got this whole breakdown of how you can break down the deer and how you can best use it. I'm not saying this is the only way to break down a deer. There's lots of different ways to break down deer. For me, I think it's one of the simplest ways, yeah, to get people to be able to use it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.